He thought he was leaving me broke and desperate. My husband walked out, trading me for his younger secretary, convinced I was financially useless. What he didn't know, while he was busy planning his future without me, I was quietly sealing a $2.5 million deal. One that would make him regret everything. By the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. He lost everything, and I walked away richer than ever. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the divorce papers on the counter, my fingers tightening around the cool granite surface. My name was printed at the top, followed by the words, "Dissolution of marriage." I should have felt sad. After 15 years of marriage, this should have been heartbreaking. But all I felt was a cold, simmering rage. I flipped through the pages, scanning for the reason, the excuse, the justification for why Ethan was throwing everything away. And there it was. Wife has shown an ongoing lack of financial contribution to the household and is incapable of maintaining an independent standard of living. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Financially useless. That was what he thought of me? That was how he saw me after all these years? He had no idea. 15 years ago, when we got married, we were supposed to be partners. He was an ambitious real estate investor with big dreams, and I was a software engineer with a vision. We were young, eager, and ready to build a life together. At least I thought we were a team. The reality? I spent years putting him first. When his business hit rough patches, I picked up extra freelance jobs to help with expenses. When he wanted to impress clients, I quietly dipped into my savings to fund his networking dinners. And when I started my own company, my tech startup, the thing I poured my heart and soul into, he barely acknowledged it. "That little project of yours," he'd say, amused. "It's cute, Rachel. But let's be real, tech startups are a gamble. Real estate, that's where the real money is." I let him think that. I let him believe his real estate deals were the foundation of our financial future while I worked late nights, coding, building, and turning my little project into something real. And now he had the audacity to leave me, for his secretary, with a smirk on his face, convinced I had nothing. The front door opened, and I heard the familiar sound of his polished leather shoes tapping against the hardwood floor. I didn't turn around. I could already feel the smug energy radiating off him. "You saw the papers," Ethan said casually, like we were discussing the weather. I took a slow breath and turned to face him. He looked as polished as ever, his tie slightly loosened, that self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "You didn't even have the decency to tell me first?" My voice was calm. Too calm. Ethan sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "Rachel, come on. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. We both knew this was coming." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And why is that?" He gave me that look, the one he always used when he thought he was explaining something simple to someone too stupid to understand. "Because let's be honest, Rachel. You're not exactly, how do I put this, in a position to fight me on this. I mean, you've been coasting for years. You don't even have an income. It's not like you have anything to fall back on." A slow smile curled on my lips. "You think I have nothing?" Ethan shrugged, completely unfazed. "Look, you tried. But not everyone is cut out for business. And that's okay. Vanessa, she gets it. She understands real investments. She sees the big picture. It's time for me to move forward." There it was. He wasn't just leaving me. He was trading me in, upgrading to a younger, more financially promising model. I held his gaze, forcing myself to stay calm, because Ethan had no idea. He had no idea that the startup he had mocked, dismissed, and ignored for years was about to change my life forever. Because while Ethan was busy packing his bags and planning his new future, I had been negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal behind closed doors. A $2.5 million acquisition. But he didn't know that yet, so I just smiled and let him believe he had won. Unlike Ethan, I never relied on shortcuts or shady deals. I believed in building something real, something that would last, not just for a quick win, but for true success. Ethan had always been about appearances, about seeming successful, while I was the one actually putting in the work. I had spent years developing my AI-driven analytics company, starting from scratch, coding through sleepless nights, juggling multiple freelance jobs just to keep my vision alive. It wasn't easy. There were times when I wasn't sure if it would work, times when I wondered if I was wasting my time. But I had something Ethan never did, determination that didn't fade when things got hard. The funny thing is, he never even noticed. Ethan was so wrapped up in his own world. His real estate deals, his networking events, his endless need for validation, that he never bothered to ask how my company was doing. And honestly, I never offered to tell him. At first, I kept quiet because I didn't want to hear his usual dismissive comments. It's cute that you're trying, Rachel. Tech startups are risky, you know. Most of them fail. You should probably focus on something more stable. But as my business started growing, as I landed bigger clients and watched my platform gain traction in the market, I realized something. It wasn't just that Ethan didn't believe in me. He didn't care. So I stopped trying to prove myself to him. While he was mocking me for playing entrepreneur, I was signing deals with major investors. While he was spending nights out with his secretary, I was in my home office, building something that would outlast him. And then, the turning point. The week before I signed the divorce papers, it happened. The email that changed everything. It was from a Fortune 500 company, one that had been circling my startup for months. We had negotiated back and forth, but now they were making their final offer. $2.5 million. I sat there, staring at the number on the screen, my heart pounding. Not just because of the money, not just because of what this meant for my career, but because of the timing. Ethan had filed for divorce assuming I was broke. He had left me thinking I had nothing, believing that I would struggle, that I would fall apart without him. But now I was 2 signatures away from being a multimillionaire. And the best part? He had no idea. So I played along. I let him believe his own fantasy, let him think I was struggling. I nodded quietly when he graciously offered to be fair in the divorce, when he assumed I'd come crawling back someday, regretting everything. Little did he know, the only thing I regretted was not seeing his true colors sooner. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I had never seen Ethan look so smug. The way he carried himself, the casual arrogance in his stride. It was as if he had already rewritten history, painting himself as the man who had escaped a deadweight marriage. He thought he was trading up, stepping into a new era of success with Vanessa at his side. And oh, how he flaunted it. The social media posts of them dining at exclusive restaurants, the flashy business meetings with his investor friends, the endless talk about exciting new ventures. To him, this wasn't just a divorce. It was a rebranding. Vanessa, of course, played her part well. She was perfectly positioned as his upgrade, younger, stylish, and, according to Ethan, brilliant with investments. She just gets business, Rachel, he had once told me, flashing that self-satisfied grin. You were always too cautious. That's why you never really made it big. I had smiled then, pretending to absorb his words, when in reality, I was holding back laughter. Because while Ethan was blindly betting his entire future on a woman he barely knew, I was securing mine with absolute certainty. Vanessa had spun a beautiful lie, convincing Ethan that she had exclusive connections in the tech world. She claimed she had access to an AI-driven startup that was on the verge of exploding in value, a company that only insiders like her knew about. It was all fabricated nonsense, but Ethan, he ate it up. And he didn't stop there. Desperate to prove his brilliance to the world, he pitched this golden opportunity to his investor friends, promising insane returns if they got in early. One by one, they poured money into the venture, convinced that Ethan, the real estate mastermind, had just unlocked the next big thing. Watching it unfold was almost entertaining. Ethan had always underestimated me. He believed his power came from perception. If people thought he was winning, then he was. But what he never understood was that real success isn't about appearances. It's about knowing when to act and when to stay silent. I had mastered the latter. And now, the moment I had been waiting for had arrived. The divorce papers were laid out before me, the crisp edges stark against the polished wood of the courtroom table. Ethan sat across from me, exuding overconfidence, barely able to contain his satisfaction. He was already celebrating, convinced that I would soon realize my mistake. "I just hope you'll be okay, Rachel," he mused, shaking his head with mock concern. "Starting over at your age without much financial backing, it's not easy." I held his gaze, my lips curving into the smallest, most infuriatingly calm smile. I didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't correct him. I simply picked up the pen, signed my name, and handed the papers back without a single word. Ethan watched me, waiting for some reaction, some sign of regret. He got nothing. And then, I stood up and walked out, without a backward glance. The very next morning, as Ethan celebrated his so-called victory, I finalized the $2.5 million acquisition deal that had been sitting in my inbox. By the time he realized what he had lost, it wouldn't just be too late, it would be catastrophic. 1 week. That's how long it took for everything to unravel. Ethan was still basking in his so-called victory, still parading Vanessa around as proof that he had traded up, still drinking champagne with his investor friends, convinced he was on the brink of something big. Then the news broke. He was sitting in his favorite cigar lounge when the segment aired on national television. A feature on women in tech, highlighting recent multimillion-dollar acquisitions. And there I was, seated on a sleek stage, in front of a packed audience, speaking with effortless confidence as the host beamed at me. The headline at the bottom of the screen flashed. Rachel Carter, the woman behind a $2.5 million AI acquisition. Ethan's drink froze halfway to his lips. The room around him faded into static. The words barely registered as the interviewer praised my brilliant business strategy, my ability to scale a startup from the ground up, my success in securing one of the most lucrative AI deals of the year. Ethan stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. $2.5 million. The ex-wife he had mocked, dismissed, left for broke, had just played him flawlessly. His stomach twisted as the realization hit like a truck. I was never struggling. I was never desperate. I had been winning the entire time, and I had let him believe he had won. The low murmur in the lounge turned into a hush as the segment ended. A few men, his own investor friends, turned to look at him, their expressions unreadable. He swallowed, his throat dry. His mind raced for an explanation, for a way to spin this, but there was no way to fix it. His ego had been publicly shattered. The illusion he had spent months crafting had collapsed in seconds. He barely heard Vanessa's phone blowing up with messages. He barely noticed the way she stiffened, gripping her glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. But when she turned to him, her expression was something he had never seen before. Fear. "Why the hell didn't you know about this?" she hissed under her breath, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Ethan had no answer. But Vanessa wasn't waiting. By the time they got home, she was in full-blown panic mode. "We need to invest more. Right now. The fund is fine, but we need to expand before people start pulling out." He barely heard her. His brain was still replaying the interview, still grappling with the fact that Rachel had outplayed him so effortlessly. But the more Vanessa spoke, the more her words didn't sit right. Every sentence sounded forced, every promise thinner than before. And then it clicked. She was panicking because she knew. She knew the entire operation was about to collapse. He felt it in his gut. The investment scheme, the startup she had convinced him to pour everything into, was nothing but smoke and mirrors. His pulse pounded as he checked his phone, flipping through the numbers. The startup wasn't expanding. It was bleeding money. Investors were withdrawing faster than he could replace them. And that's when he saw the final blow, a message from one of his closest contacts. "Ethan, just saw the news about Rachel. You lied to us, pulled my money from the deal. So are the others." Panic clawed at his throat. He had spent everything trying to impress these people, had staked his entire reputation on being the one who could take them to the next level. And now they were gone. One by one, his so-called connections began distancing themselves, treating him like a sinking ship. And Vanessa, she didn't stick around to watch him drown. By the time he woke up the next morning, she was gone. Her side of the closet, empty. Her phone, disconnected. His bank account, drained. Every last dollar he had funneled into her scheme, vanished. She had taken everything. And for the first time in his miserable, self-absorbed life, Ethan understood what it felt like to be left with nothing. The same way he had left me. The satisfaction wasn't in the money. It wasn't even in watching Ethan's downfall unfold so perfectly, like a house of cards crashing in slow motion. No, the real victory was in knowing he had destroyed himself. I hadn't lifted a single finger. I hadn't exposed his lies. I hadn't warned his investors. I hadn't whispered a single word about Vanessa's scam. He had walked straight into his own ruin, blinded by his own arrogance. And now, as I sipped my coffee on the terrace of my newly acquired property, the poetic justice of it all settled over me like a warm breeze. This house, the one Ethan and Vanessa had picked out together, the one they had planned to start their perfect life in, was now mine. I had bought it at an auction for a fraction of its original value, after Ethan's finances had crumbled so spectacularly that his mortgage lender had been all too eager to sell it off. The irony was almost too good to be true. For a brief moment I considered keeping it, living here simply to remind myself of what I had overcome. But no, this house had never been mine, and I had no desire to live in the ruins of someone else's delusion. So I sold it, at a profit. It was just business. But to Ethan it was the final nail in his coffin. His last thread of hope had been holding on to the belief that, somehow, he could rebuild, that this nightmare was temporary, that he would rise again. But now, even the house he had once dreamed of sharing with Vanessa was gone. That's when the calls started. First I ignored them. Then came the messages. "Rachel, we need to talk. Please, just hear me out. I made a mistake. I should have blocked his number. Should have let him rot in the mess he had created. But curiosity got the best of me. So, for one last time I agreed to meet him. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the air between us thick with the weight of everything that had happened. Ethan looked nothing like the man I had once known. The confidence, the charm, the untouchable arrogance. All of it was gone. What remained was a man who had lost everything. He cleared his throat, looking down at his coffee before glancing up at me. His eyes filled with something I never thought I'd see. Regret. "Rachel," he started, voice rough. "I messed up. I said nothing. I should have never left. I see that now. Vanessa. She wasn't who I thought she was. I was stupid. I was blind." I tilted my head slightly, my expression unreadable. "I thought," he swallowed hard, "I thought I was making the right move. But you were the one who built something real. You were the one who actually had value. And I threw that away." The words hung in the air, desperate and empty. I took a slow sip of my drink before setting it down, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "You told me I was financially useless, remember?" My voice was calm, even. "Turns out, you were just financially blind." His face fell apart in front of me. I could see it, the last shred of hope crumbling to dust. I stood up, brushing non-existent dust from my sleeve. "Goodbye, Ethan." And just like that, I walked out of the cafe, out of his life, out of his story. I never looked back, because the past no longer had any hold on me. If there's one thing this entire experience taught me, it's this: never let someone else define your worth. For years, I let Ethan's words shape the way I saw myself. I let him tell me my ambitions were small. I let him convince me that my success didn't matter. I let him make me believe that, somehow, I wasn't enough. But the truth? I was never the one who lacked value. Ethan and Vanessa lost everything, not because I fought them, not because I sought revenge, but because their own greed, arrogance, and deceit consumed them from the inside out. I never had to lift a finger. They set their own fire. They watched their own house burn. And I walked away untouched, unbothered, unstoppable. Because true success isn't about revenge. It isn't about proving people wrong. It isn't about looking back at the ones who doubted you, who betrayed you, who thought they could replace you. True success is moving forward on your own terms. So to anyone listening, anyone who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they weren't good enough, remember this. You don't need to get even. You just need to win. And when you do, they'll destroy themselves trying to catch up. What do you think about this story? Did Ethan and Vanessa get what they deserved? Or do you think karma was too harsh? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, or just leave a 2 if you loved it, or a 7 if you think it could have ended differently. And if you've ever had to prove your worth when someone underestimated you, share this story with a friend who needs to hear it.